will, yep, like that. We will have everybody but me and the candidates and the timekeeper. Everybody else will be on mute, so we can focus on the candidates. And before we get started, a couple of housekeeping things. I got an email late this afternoon from Representative Michelle Beckley, and she's got bronchitis and has no voice. So she will not be able to join us. She's been testing negative for COVID, but she's waiting for a PCR test. So she wanted to be here, but could not be. So it will just be Mike Collier and Carla Braley. Also, I wanted to plug our next Zoom on Tuesday at 6 p.m. where we'll have 5 of the 6 candidates for the Texas 21 seat. So if you need information on the Zoom links for that, just drop Terry an email. And oops, Terry, can you unmute Peg? She muted herself and now can't fix it. Terry will drop his email into the chat box, so you can email him if you need the Zoom link for that. So as soon as my timekeeper gets unmuted, because she has a bell, and if she's muted, you can't hear the bell. We will get, okay, she's unmuted now. So each candidate's going to get 5 minutes to do kind of an initial pitch, and then I've got a series of questions that I'm going to ask, and they each get 3 minutes to answer those, and toward the end they'll each have a minute to wrap up. So, and we're going to go, I'm going to alternate starting with one then the other. We're going to start in the order they appear on our ballot here in Kendall County. And Mike, that means you go first.
Okay, well, so if you can hear me and see me, hello everybody in Kendall County. It's nice to see you. I wish we were together. I mean, believe me, I wish we were together for probably 3 reasons. One, we'd be together, which is joyful. Second, we'd be in Kendall County, which is very joyful. And third, my wife would have me out of the house, which would be very, very joyful for her anyway. So but we're doing it right. We're being safe. So I'm very, very happy to spend some time with you this evening, and thank you. So I mean, you all know how important this race is, and you may know that I ran against Stan Patrick last time in 2018, and we got very close. And when I stepped away from that race, I said, my job now is to make sure that the next lieutenant governor is a Democrat, and that's so unbelievably important in this particular election cycle for a lot of reasons. One is gerrymandering, and the legislature now is in solid control of Republicans, likely to be that way for a decade. And we all know how this works. I mean, they redraw the districts, they're in control, and it stays that way until the districts sort of change because demographics change. But I think that they believe that they have 10 years of uninterrupted work, and I don't like where they would take us. They're taking us to a place that I don't want to go. They're taking us to a place where Texans don't want to go. And we must win governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, because redistricting doesn't touch that. Where would they take us? I think that they will put an end to public education as we know it. They're already competing in their primary on the basis of choice and vouchers. And we know what choice and vouchers means in Republican speak. It means hollowing out our public schools. And we cannot let that happen. And this race will prevent it. A Democrat winning this race will prevent that, and we must win this race. We have to fix the damn grid, and they are not being honest with us when they say that they have fixed it. And I can go through chapter and verse, and maybe we'll save that for another time. I don't need to spend a lot of time convincing folks what you already know, that that grid is rickety and it's dangerous, and they have not fixed it, and that's unconscionable. We have to expand Medicaid. I mean, healthcare is a human right. We're a wealthy nation, a wealthy state, and we're right on the cusp of expanding Medicaid, which would solve a problem for so many people. We have to fight for our rights. What they're doing with voter suppression is just unconscionable. The Democrats believe in democracy. We have to win the lieutenant governor position so that we can fight for democracy. This really is our moment of maximum peril. We should get rid of gerrymandering, by the way. Perhaps we'll get into that. Independent Redistricting Commission. We have to fight for LGBT rights. They're downright hostile to the LGBT community. I think that's morally wrong. I think that people should be able to live and love the way their creator made them, not the way Dan Patrick has in mind. And we have to fight for a woman's rights, and a woman's right to be in control of her destiny and her health care and her body every bit as much as a man is in control of his. And there's a lot of other things that we need to talk about. We need to talk about water infrastructure. We need to talk about the environment. We need to talk about climate change. We need to talk about criminal justice reform. None of these things will happen if we don't win this race. Bad things will happen along all of those lines if we don't win this race. And I've seen this coming from a long way off. Now, in 2018, I came close. I got within 4.8 percentage points of beating Dan Patrick. And I also got a lot of votes in rural Texas. And Beto's not here to defend himself. My friend Beto's not here to defend himself, but I got more votes than he did in Kendall County and all of the rural / Republican counties. I don't think we have Republican counties. I think we have non-voting counties. And so that's why I'm in this race, and quite passionate to see the next lieutenant governor be a Democrat. And so I think that's about all I wish to say in my 5 minutes. I may not have used it all. I happen to be an accountant, and we get paid for our brevity. So I guess I'll stop there, and whatever I didn't discuss, and I'm sure there's a lot I didn't discuss, perhaps we'll get to that in the question and answer section.
Okay, super. All right, Carla Braley, and I think, oh yeah, good, you're unmuted. Good. So go ahead.
Well, thank you all for having me. This is so good what you're doing to ensure that everyone gets to a democratic way of being introduced and exposed to the candidates. I am Carla Braley. I am running to be your next lieutenant governor. I'm a mother. I'm an educator of over 20 years and a lifelong committed Democrat. You know probably better than me that state government led by Dan Patrick has become small and mean-spirited, serving the extremist views of a few while leaving everyday Texans behind. Yes, you and I. We need a fearless, dynamic fighter for all Texans, and that's who I've been my entire life, fighting on the line. And we know that our democracy is at stake. We need a leader who believes in one united Texas, one that is fair, equitable, and accessible to all Texans, no matter who they are or where they live. And I will be that person as your next lieutenant governor. I'm a native Houstonian and a lifelong Texan. I now live in Houston, in the heart of the historic Third Ward neighborhood, where for the last 12 years, I have worked as a professor of sociology at Texas Southern University. But I've taught at every level, from elementary, middle school, high school, to now college, and I've taught many different subjects. I know what we're facing in our state related to public education. As a teacher, as a former administrator, if we do not provide a high quality, inclusive educational system, it is also going to impact our workforce. It's going to impact the choices that so many of our children who are our future are able to make, whether they attend college or whether they are exposed to vocational training. We have to do whatever we can today so that we'll have a better day, a better future in our state. Mike talked about expansion in terms of Medicaid. It is absolutely 100% one of the first things that we have to do is address Medicaid. We have to make sure that we have a high quality, accessible, and affordable healthcare system in this state. We cannot continue to leave money on the line while people's health is at stake. As well as high premiums, we have to address that. People are working every day, and we have to make sure that they have the ability to not only take care of their housing, but also their health care. And when we talk about rights, we're talking about democracy. We must defend our democracy. It is absolutely necessary that we have voting rights for all Texans, because our vote is our voice and our voice is our vote. Women, trans, all of us are together, and all of us should be able to have a choice and be treated in the utmost humane way. Under this leadership, everything has been divisive. Under this leadership, we know that our state is not going to move forward in a way that all Texans are celebrated, not tolerated, but celebrated. And that's why I'm here to run and become our next Lieutenant Governor.
All right. Thank you very much. With this many participants, we just felt there was a better idea, would flow better if I collected questions in advance. You're welcome to type some in the chat. If we have time at the end, we might can get some of those. But these are the questions I'm going to start with that were submitted to me ahead of time. And Carla, we'll start with you. What do you have to do to win? What are the numbers and where are your votes? Oh, there you are. Hang on. Oh, sorry, we're still trying to work the kinks out of this. Terry, I can't unmute her.
For some reason, she has disappeared from my, oh, okay, sorry.
All right.
There we
Well,
go.
I can tell you this. We will not get the votes if I can't talk. So that's the first thing. You have to go out and listen, right? And I have to be able to share our platform. The thing about running as a Democrat, many of us have very similar platforms. I really do believe that getting the votes means that we have to go local. One of the things that I can say about this pandemic is there are pros and cons. I think every one of us are probably ready for COVID to go away. I'm not approaching that in a complaint, but it's just time for us to move on. But the great thing is our state is humongous. And this allows us to be able to be with one another in a way that maybe we couldn't. And especially in terms of this primary election, being able to touch each and every county. Some of us have. I've been able to travel this state for the past 3.5 years as the vice chair of the Texas Democratic Party. But what I will say is that I believe that we win this election locally. I think that we win this election with the relationships that we have on the ground and how we have addressed and built relationships with constituency leaders, activists, elected officials, and quite frankly, we're in a digital world. So we're able to reach places that we don't necessarily have to be physically, but I do think people have to know that you're there and that you're listening and that you are tuned to the issues that matter most. Texas is so huge that an issue that may matter, in Houston may not necessarily matter in Rio Grande, but we have to identify those messages that overlap and then make it where we are in these communities to address those issues that may be very specific to their communities. But I do think that whatever we do, it has to be grassroots. We have to also reach out to rural. That is, you can't do anything in Texas and win big without addressing rural, but I also think we have to address communities of color. And I think that we need to have definitely a diverse statewide ticket because turnout has always mattered. And we know that we're not where we should be with turnout as Democrats. And I think that matters in terms of, how this ticket will shape up and that it's mattered in the past. And I think that will matter now and in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike, same question to you. What do you have to do to win? What are the numbers and where are your votes?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So picking up where I left off in 18, I got 3.8 million votes. Dan Patrick got 4.2 million votes. He gets to be lieutenant governor. I only missed it by just under 400,000 votes. So when I get up in the morning, I think, and I'm going to assume that the state hasn't grown and that it is going to be, the same number of votes. That is not a good assumption. The state has grown, but the state has grown in the direction of Democrats. And you can see that our evolution. So I'm being conservative when I make the assumption that, it's the same state now as it was in 2018, and that I have to find 400,000 new votes. First of all, I have to get all the 3.8 million that came out for me the first time to come back. And there's work involved in doing that. So a lot of what we'll be doing is retracing our steps. And then, of course, with Beto running for governor, that's very good news because he's a voter turner-outer, and I'm delighted that he's running. But I think probably in terms of three broad areas that are going to make the difference. First of all, I'd like to talk about rural. And Beto and I have already had this conversation because I did better than him. I'm not even supposed to say it once, but I'm going to say it twice in the same meeting. He'll never forgive me for this. But in the 172 counties that are classified as rural, and that's 2/3 of all counties. We have 254 in total. 172 are classified as rural, although some of them have some pretty big towns in them. Of the 172 counties, I was the top vote getter, did better than Beto. I didn't get to 30%, but I got to about 27%. If we get from 27% to 30%, that closes the gap that I have to close by about half. That's very, very good news. And I feel there's great receptivity to what we're doing in rural Texas, partly because Dan Patrick's performance is down, but also when you go out and talk to folks about, in a substantive way, about, for example, where is the money going to come from for public education? How could we possibly do more with education without raising your property taxes? We can have that conversation and folks respond to it. And now we add to that the grid. Why did the grid fail? And what steps do we need to take to to fix the grid? I think it's very, very, very fertile ground to get us from 26% to 30%. That closes the gap by about half. Then I also think about the Hispanic community, and we spend an awful lot of time thinking about and how we're going to improve our performance. I have a team on the ground already in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, because we were disappointed as Democrats in what happened in 2020. I have to recognize that the Hispanic vote community is not a monolith, but you can go into the valley and it's very, very high concentration of Hispanic voters and talk to them. I think we have to get the message right. The Democrats don't get the message right when we talk to Hispanic voters. We need to be talking about good paying jobs, and we need to be talking about public education and being able to afford to go to trade school for their children or colleges. We need to be talking about access to health care. And stay away from the culture war issues and focus on those things. And that's what we didn't do in 2020. And that's what we must do to improve our performance. And then finally, there's an awful lot of Democrats that just don't go to the polls. They're registered and they don't vote, and high concentrations in urban communities. And we have to work very, very hard. A big part of that message is going to be, if you don't vote, you might lose the ability to vote. So what I'm finding is that that's really proving to be a motivator. And so we have to do that. Finally, those are all the good news. Those are all the pieces where they're going to fit together. But we also have swimming a bit of a current, which in the form of voter suppression. Now, I'm very concerned about that. And there's a lot of really, really smart people who are in the business of voter protection. I met many of them in my campaigns and also in the Biden campaign. We'll be very aggressive, very well funded, to make sure that we put the pieces in place to make sure that people can actually vote.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that.
That's where the numbers.
Yeah.
That's where the numbers. That's where the win is.
Okay.
That's the path to it. And young people.
Yep.
We got to do better with young people.
Yeah, Peg?
Laura, we may want to let the candidates know that what this bell sounds like and what it means.
Okay, because I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear it?
No. Well, there it is.
I heard it then.
You didn't hear it before. Okay, I will keep ringing it then. Okay.
Or you can just, we know each other, Laura. With me, I'm not bashful. Just go like this. Stop. That means stop. I'll stop.
Okay, all right. Cut.
Okay, so next question, and I'm going to start this time with Mike. How do you plan to reach out to rural and Latino voters and convince them to vote for you? And you spoke a little bit about that, but if you want to maybe expand on it.
Sure. In order to win, and this applies to every election, every community, you have to have the right messenger knocking on the right door with the right message. The right messenger knocking on the right door with the right message. A big part of this is just the management challenge. to make sure that we have the right person knocking on the door. The person that knocks on the door needs to be somebody that the person who lives in that house feels comfortable with, feels a sense of camaraderie with. And then we have to have the right door, which means we've got to get the data right. And then finally, as a candidate, we have to get the message right. And often that's where Democrats really blow it, is in the messaging when it comes to particularly rural and Hispanic communities. My experience in 18 was that if you talk very substantively about the specific issues we face, and then talk about what you think the solution is and get into the details, and then ask, what do you think? That people stop thinking of it as a partisan contest, and they think about it the way we want them to think about it, which is who you're going to hire to be your next lieutenant governor. So that's the way, in my opinion, we would approach it. And again, where we've just not done well is with the Hispanic community, because we talk about also, and by the way, we should talk about law enforcement and safety in your communities, and we must talk about a safe and secure border. And if Democrats don't have that conversation, then we might as well just say goodbye to the Rio Grande Valley, because that's what's on their minds, and we need to measure up there. So the answer is in there. I'm not sure how much time I have left. I'm very sensitive to.
Yep, minute and a half.
Yep.
Okay, well then I owe you a minute and a half. I'll give it back. How's that?
Okay. All right, Carla, same question. How do you plan to reach out to rural and Latino voters and convince them to vote for you?
I think the same way you do to convince others to reach out. You talk to them. You let them know what's at stake. Many of us already know what's at stake, but people have to feel like you're authentic and you really do care. That's number one. Number two, it can't be our first visit only during political season.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make sure that they feel like they, along with their issues, are relevant. And when we only show up, sometimes we go to these communities, or I shouldn't say these, we go to communities, because it's all communities. I think you asked the question about rural and Latino, but I think it's so many communities that are not necessarily touched. And that's why it has to be grassroots. But the other thing, that Mike mentioned is messaging. And as Democrats, we have not always gotten the message right, but we also have not always sent the messengers, or we have not even dealt with a lot of communities that we need to until after Labor Day. In this case, it's primary season, and we just can't do that. When we're thinking about issues that are related to the freezing and flooding, those are things that even a Democrat, whether it's the party, you all know I served as the vice chair of the Texas Democratic Party, those issues have to be relevant and we have to be on the ground. So in politics, we have, you all know we'll have a day of service or a week of service. That's what we have to do all year long. So for us, it means talking the same language. It means on our staff that we're hiring people. Mike mentioned that who's ever knocking on the door, whether that's staff or whether that's a volunteer, but people have to feel like they are part of it. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to matter. And so using language in a way that people can understand. I used to have a conversation about, we use the word economy a lot. But the reality is people on the ground, they care about jobs. We have to use those words, jobs. That's what matters, because many people are robbing Peter to pay Paul. Every day they are working. They're concerned about jobs. And so we have to use language and I say concepts, I'm a professor, you all, but language that is going to really hit the heart. Family, it's absolutely absurd. As a mother of a teenager, I could not imagine someone taking away my child and I cannot see my child again. We still have children that are separated from their families, and many of you all are parents on this call, and we can't fathom that. Right now, the current leadership that we have, they don't even have a plan.
Fine, Carla.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
My apology. I didn't hear the bell.
I know. I don't know why.
Mike, I did not
No.
hear the bell.
I didn't either. And we tested that bell before we started
Yeah.
this call, so I don't know what's going on. So
And I
maybe-
did see your face looking, but I thought you were nodding your head. I didn't know. It was like, no, no, no time. So you got to have fun with this stuff.
yeah. Okay, thank you. Obviously, we need to rethink the bell. We'll get that straightened out before the next time. So Peg will just butt in when it's time.
Yeah.
All right, next question. And Carla, I'm going to start with you on this one. What is your strategy to pass Medicaid expansion in the Senate and ultimately in the legislature? What steps will you take to achieve this result?
Well, you all, you know that it is highly likely that we're going to be Democratic alone. We're not going to, more than likely have a Democratic Senate. And we hope that we're going to have a lot of other offices Democrats. So first, we going to have to identify those senators on a Democrat side that's ready to roll, who will be best to move forward on certain committees and move forward on certain bills. Second, I think we're going to have to identify those Republicans who want to put people at the center and not politics and profit. And so those who are reasonable and willing to work. For some of you, you may have heard that Barbara Jordan is one of my sheroes, or is my shero. And, I tell people the story that she writes about. Quite frankly, when she went to the Senate, it was not all Democrats. And so for her, it was working across the aisle. And she said, if I can just get to my friends, because many of them became her friends, to their hearts just for a moment, we can change policy. Right in that moment, we can change policy. And so it's going to be about, finding our friends, building the coalitions, finding out what their constituents absolutely want, the things that they're not willing to bend on because they feel like they can't. And then we have to become partners in with federal programs. You all, we're leaving money on the table. I don't have to talk this to you all because you know this. And so we have to make sure that we're putting people first. And when we put people first, then we'll become partners and work with not only, the federal government, but also stakeholders, listening to doctors that matter. And so it really is about, expanding what our table looks like of stakeholders so that others can have voices in how this works out. We have to do something about the high premiums and the level of uninsured people that we have in the state of Texas. And I think that's how you do it. You bring people who are experts in that field, and to make sure that it's very diverse, because doctors who necessarily practice in urban is still a different approach, even in a rural area. So I think that that's what we have to do. We have to broaden that table of who is able to have a voice.
All right, great. Mike, same question. What is your strategy to pass Medicaid expansion in the Senate and the legislature? What steps will you take to achieve this result?
Yeah, great question. First of all, expanding Medicaid is a very high priority. But what I'm about to say now applies not only to Medicaid expansion, but it applies to an awful lot of the policies that we're passionate about. Pick any one of them. Here's sort of what the dynamic in Texas politics I perceive is this. Democrats, we care about people and we care about our community. And we know that there are a lot of our fellow Texans that need help, and Medicaid expansion will help an awful lot of people that need that help and deserve that help. They're working hard, but they can't afford health care. And it's not their fault. Wages have not kept up with the cost of health care. And so we need to help them, and expanding Medicaid does that. That's where Democrats' heads are. We want to help people in the community. Republicans fight these things. They fight these things because they feel like, well, I don't need help. I got what I need. I'm not going to help you get what you need. I'm going to help mine. And that's where the tension is. Now, breaking down that tension often is a matter of going into the Republicans, and the Senate's going to be 2/3 Republican senators. So you got to be able to speak their language. And the way to break down that tension is, in my experience and judgment, is to go into districts where the senator's Republican and share with them the output of the Perryman report, for example. Do you guys know Ray Perryman? He's an economist, very, very well respected. He is not perceived as partisan, and he has shown us a couple of things. One, he has shown us that the cost of care goes down by a factor of 8. If people go to a clinic and a doctor instead of going to an emergency room, the cost of healthcare goes down by a factor of 8. We're paying for all of it already through higher property taxes in community hospitals and higher taxes. So it brings the cost of care down. That is a good financial deal. And second, because it brings in $9 billion of federal revenues, which produces an increase in the tax base, we actually have more revenues coming into the system. For every dollar that we spend out of pocket for Medicaid, it produces $1.3 in revenues back into the system. It is a good financial deal. Now, if you talk dollars and cents and show Republicans that the thing that we have in mind is not only good for people, it's also good for your pocketbook and fair, they get on board. And I know for a fact that Republicans are listening to the Medicaid argument, because several elected Republicans have talked about expanding Medicaid. Dan Patrick has said no. So I don't think Medicaid's going to be all that hard. The groundwork has been laid. And that same thought process applies to funding education. It applies to fixing the damn grid. It applies to child protective services. It applies to solving maternal mortality problems. Being able to speak that language is the essence of personally what I'm trying to achieve. And we can be successful as Democrats, despite the fact that it's a majority Republican legislature. And that's the essence of my ambition.
And
Thank you
that's your
very-
time.
That's your
Good job.
time. Yeah, Jarvis.
How'd I do?
Yeah, right
I
on the
landed the
dot.
plane right on the numbers. All right, all right.
I'm going to do a couple of the questions we've gotten in chat. One was from Richard Caldwell. He says, if we don't have a big freeze, then the grid is not an issue. What do you do then? What's your message then? And Mike, I'll start with you on that one and then go to Carla.
Well, they haven't fixed the grid. They haven't fixed the damn grid. And in politics, you know that if you have to go out and teach people something, explain to them what might happen to you if, it doesn't work. The state is too big. People are distracted. They have their lives. They have their families. They're not going to pay too terribly much attention to what any of us have to say. If we were starting from scratch and saying the grid might fail, the grid might fail, we would sound like Chicken Little, and I don't think it would matter much to anybody. But the grid failed, and people remain furious, and they saw what happened, and they sat in their houses and they froze, and they're still paying off the busted pipes and fixing their homes, and Texans died, and they know that we came within 5 minutes of a complete blackout, which have been absolutely as devastating as if a nuclear bomb had struck this state. It would have been so awful. Texans know that. Texans also know they're being lied to. They also know that they did not fix the damn grid. And by the way, this changing of the leadership and the governance of PUC, the Public Utility Commission, and ERCOT, look carefully at the end result. You now have large Abbott and Patrick donors running those operations, and they're part of the propaganda machine. Texans know they smell a rat. Now, I'm praying for a mild winter, because Lord help us if we have another Uri. But when it's time to get out there and start campaigning in the general and talking about the damn grid, Texans know they're being lied to. What they will respond to is our having a very substantive, here's how we fix the problem. We winterize those gas wells right now. We winterize the generating systems up to Uri standards and not up to 2011 standards. We tie the grid to the rest of the country so that if God forbid we go down, we don't go completely down for months and months and months. And then we change the economics so that consumers don't get ripped off. We were paying more for power than if we'd been a regulated utility even before the winter storm. And on top of that, you're heaping the bailouts of these corporate interests. Texans know that something's very, very wrong. And all they're looking for is somebody that they can trust. And having this conversation, of course, I'm rushing through it because I'm trying to be a good Democrat here and not overshoot the runway, but going out and talking substantively, Texans will listen very carefully. We don't need another Uri to go out there and explain this. And I pray that we don't, because it'll hurt us.
Okay, Carla, same question about what if we don't have a freeze?
We still have bad leadership.
Yeah.
The mere fact that we don't know what will happen if we will have a freeze or not have a freeze is a problem, because we've had a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability. And we know that oversight just simply did not happen, because there was no reason that we should have been in the situation. I said it earlier that Mike and I are not different in a lot of these matters, because we're Democrats and we're all good Democrats, and we're trying to do the best that we can. In terms of the grid, we know that we not only have to winterize, Mike, but I also like to even, and Mike knows this too, to even look at this even broader, that we have a grid issue. And if it doesn't freeze, again, we'll still have the bad leadership, but we have a digital divide issue. And so we have an issue around energy. We have an issue around electricity. We have an issue that how, yes, we spend a lot of time on oil and gas here, but we're going to have to, focus somewhat on renewable energy. We're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to bring different people to the table, because Mike is right. We cannot trust what's happening, and we should not trust. They have given us reasons not to trust what's happening. And they've had over a year right now, and we are still not clear about a plan that has gone forth. They have had the same cronies that they, have appointed. They may have changed names, but they still have the same goal. I also think that Mike is right. At the end of the day, the government needs to be more helpful, in this case, the state. And whatever we do, we need to save funds for many Texans who are, again, are really in a troubled place. They're working every day, but yet they can barely afford their utilities. And then when they can afford them, they may not have access if we have a bad freeze. And so I think it's still broader than if it doesn't happen, then what will we still be stuck with? And that's the leadership that's divisive, and a leadership that has put people not at the center, but profit and product. And that's what the whole grid piece is. They have allowed corporations to be excused, in particular around utilities. And those are things that we just have to say no to. That's going to matter in terms of the type of appointments that we do in the Senate with various committees.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question from chat, and Carla, I will start with you on this one. What is your message on border security? Is it a wall or something else?
Well, let me just say this. Automatically, I would say that there's something that we have to deal with. Number one, we know immigration is a federal issue. And we can get around that by really just treating, number one, everyone as human. I think that those who are put in a position that they have to provide the safety and security, they're not even feeling safe and secure. And what we're asking them to do a lot of times is going against their values. People want to feel safe, but secure. And what we can do is to make sure that we have funding for that. And to ensure that people have the jobs. I really believe that for that, we cannot afford to put zillions of dollars into a wall that ultimately is not going to be the primary reason that we can have safe and secure borders. I think it's what we're offering and how we're offering it to people. Everybody wants people to work hard. That's what we've been founded on a nation. And people just want a fair shot. And I think that's where we start. But we know that a wall has never been the answer. But I do think that we will have to address and become better partners in how we function around the border. And I do think that it's the bordering areas that really need to be a part of that conversation and have not always been a part of that.
Okay, Mike, same question. What is your message on border security?
So we must have a safe and secure border. It's a very, very, very high priority. Mm-hmm. It's not something Republicans do and Democrats ignore. This Democrat says we need a safe and secure border. And I have been very, very critical of Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott because they aren't doing that for us. In their own telling, it's a disaster. They don't have a plan. They don't have a strategy. They're throwing money at it, but they don't have a plan. And I've been to the Valley more than one. I mean, I go to the Valley all the time, but I've been down there and I've talked to law enforcement. I've talked to locally elected officials, and I've talked to people who know, and I've talked to people in the business world, and they say they have no idea what the state is doing. They say there's no coordination between the DPS, the National Guard, the Border Patrol, the rest. And so we don't have there's no transparency, there's no accountability. They never tell us what they're spending the money on. They never tell us whether they're hitting their marks. That you would fire executives in the business world who did such a terrible job with a complex problem. All they do is spend money, try to make headlines, rely on spin and nonsense, and then complain that they're doing a terrible job. And by the way, it is the federal government, but it's our state and it's our community. And it's our responsibility. And Abbott and Patrick should have a plan. There should be transparency. There should be milestones. It should make sense. They should let us know what they're doing. And they should be talking to the President of the United States every day of the week, regardless of the party, to coordinate and get this done. Now, perhaps you've seen, as to the wall, perhaps you've seen Greg Abbott's latest TV commercial where he's standing next to the wall. And if you look closely, the wall stops. And it looks like there's a broom leaning up against it. And then beyond it, it's wide open. I mean, that's nonsense wrapped in stupidity. The thing that I object to about the wall as much as anything else is that it is a publicity stunt. The bad guys think that we are absolute idiots, where Abbott's going to put a wall up here. If you want a wall, put a wall, no wall there. If you don't want a wall, it's really a chain link fence. You can climb under it. You can climb over it. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. What we need is much better coordination of law enforcement. We need much effective technology that works, and talk to the locals. They know how to control this. There are parts of parts where we need a wall. There are places where we need a wall, but it has to be done it has to be environmentally friendly, by the way. The folks down there know how to do this, but it has to be done in a coordinated fashion. And then somebody has to step up and take responsibility and accountability for whether we're getting the job done or not. And you're not going to get that out of Dan Patrick. I don't know if I've run out of time yet, but I might remind you that when he ran for lieutenant governor the first time, he was running TV commercials showing the Battle of Fallujah, which is outside of Baghdad. And he was passing that off as McAllen, saying that ISIS, you remember the Middle East terrorists were going to cross the border and kill Americans, and Dan Patrick, are going to prevent that from happening. He hasn't done squat. I'm glad you stopped me. I was getting too revved up.
All right, the final question before we go on to the final wrap-up comments, and Mike, I'll start with you on this one. How would you decide on assigning committee chairs and committee members to ensure the best outcomes for Texans and not just pander or play politics?
Great question. Well, the record is going to be quite clear on election day, the promises that we're making. And when I go out there and say to Texans, here's what I believe in and here's what I'm going to fight for, I mean it. And when I'm elected lieutenant governor, I'll have a mandate. I'll have a mandate to fund public education. I'll have a mandate not to raise property taxes, but to close the corporate loopholes, which are causing the property tax crisis in the first place. A mandate to fix the damn grid, a mandate to reverse some of the things we saw in the last session, such as taking away a woman's right to choose, such as canceling gun safety, and all these other things. And so now the job is you have to get that done. With that mandate, we can get it done. But the lieutenant governor's power comes from assigning committees and then deciding what we're going to vote on, and signing committee comes first. I think it's really quite simple. You decide what are the 5 or 6 things that we said we're going to do, that we have to do, work backwards, and decide what committee assignments will allow us to achieve that objective. And you don't rule out Republicans from this exercise if they're with you. But I give you a great example. If there's the committee that handles teeing up the expanding of Medicaid is not going to be chaired by somebody who refuses to expand Medicaid. So the decision as to committee assignments will be directly related to and reconciled to doing the things we're promising that we're going to do. And it's a very aggressive agenda, but I believe that Democrats are in the majority. We're not in the fringe here when we think about expanding Medicaid, when we think about funding public education. The majority of Texans want this, and they'll express that desire by electing a Democrat as lieutenant governor, then assigning the committees to achieve that objective. And again, I'm not going to rule anybody in or anybody out. It's going to be dependent upon what does it take to get these things passed. And I hope that we find, last thing I'll say is I hope we find that this resonates amongst Republicans in the Senate, that there's enough Republicans in the Senate that do care about public education in fixing the damn grid, criminal justice reform, and the rest, that they have a meaningful role in these committee assignments.
Okay, Carla, the same question to you. How would you decide on assigning committee chairs and members to ensure the best outcomes for Texans and not just pander or play politics?
So again, the good thing is we have a lot in common because we're Democrats running on many of the same values and with the same intentions. You know, maybe about 10 years ago, I served as the executive director of boards and commission for the former mayor, Adrian Fenty, in Washington, D.C. And part of what I had to do with boards and commissions was to advise the mayor on appointments made. And as you all know, DC is not a state. So we had 120 plus boards and all of them mattered, whether it was the functionality, but understanding how the city government worked. And you have to be able to choose the right people to lead these many committees. Like Mike said, I think the first thing that you do is that you have those serious conversations with Democratic senators, but you also make sure that you have the conversations with Republican senators. And I think you identify who does what they do very, very well, but also who's willing to ensure that people serve as the first of their value. And that's what we have not done. We have to be able to choose leaders that understand that we have to have civility in government always, even if we ideologically differences. And you start off by making appointments in that way. You also make sure that you put diversity at the center of that. And I don't mean just diversity around race, class, gender, and geographical location. You allow for people who have not always been able to lead. You provide opportunity there for people to do that. I don't think it's anything, any way that we can get around being very strategic on the type of leadership that we have. We have to make sure that people who are appointed in those positions understand that we have to be able to compromise. And that is what's not happening now. So our plan is, I think it's very simple. And I think our plan is very similar, that we have to focus on what our platforms are, and which are very similar as it relates to education. I've been an educator for 20 years. And I know that education is the key. Late Barbara Jordan once said that education is the key to both economic and political empowerment. Both of those are at stake in the state of Texas. Another, we have to be on one accord as it relates to rights. Voting rights is our voice. And the Republicans have done all that they could potentially do to suppress the vote. And we know that we sustain sanity in Texas when we can, have the voter turnout that we need in the state of Texas.
All right,
And so
let's
those are
have some time.
issues. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna, I'm gonna move on to the final statements, and Carla, I'll start with you. And we do have a little bit of time, so instead of a minute, why don't you take 2 minutes to make your final pitch?
Well, thank you all for having us again. I think this is a very important forum. I want to just say that I've been a Democrat and committed to being a Democrat my entire life. I think it is for us to come together, to unite Texas in a way that it has not been under this leadership, under this administration. And I really, really believe that this administration, along with their followers, are attempting to have an anti-democratic movement. And we have to do all that we can as Texans to say no to that, and to say yes to work together to ensure that we're moving Texas forward and providing opportunities for all Texans. All Texans deserve a fair shot. All Texans deserve to be considered when we're candidates and how we're going to serve them. All candidates deserve an opportunity for a fair education, and not just fair, but to make sure that it's of high quality and it's inclusive. Children should be able to see themselves when they read a book. They should be able to understand our history in a way They have not. We know that Texas has the power to be able to not only produce billions of dollars of books in the state of Texas, but also in other states. So we have to do the work today so that we have a better future. Unfortunately, Dan Patrick and the Republicans in Austin are more interested in scoring political points with right wing than solving real problems. I'm running to get the focus back where it belongs, on Texas families. Under the divisive leadership of Lieutenant Governor Patrick and his extremist cronies, Texas has continued to rank as one of the worst states for education, healthcare, public safety, and protection of voting and equal rights.
Carla,
You all,
that's
it's
your
time for us to be big.
Thank you so much, Carla, for your statement and for joining us. Mike, your turn in 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to say hello and to discuss what I consider to be one of the most, if not the most important elections in our state, perhaps in our country. And the good news is you have 3 good Democrats running for this position. And one of us will be selected to be the nominee. And Carla and I, we're now Zoom friends. We've spent a lot of time together. You know that we'll each fight for the other. I mean, the important thing is, and usually at this point, the candidates ask for something. Here's what I'm going to ask for. Whoever wins, we must win. Democrats must win. This is such an important election. You've got 3 good Democrats that are seeking the nomination. Only one of us will be the nominee, but we're all in this together. And we must fight for each other, because with the redistricting the way it is, with the voter suppression that we're subjected to, with a clear desire in some element within the Republican Party to disable democracy so that they remain in power. This really is our moment of maximum peril. And this is not just an academic exercise, because people are really hurting. Look at how many people died because of their leadership on COVID. Look at how many people died because of their failures when it came to the grid. Look at what's going to happen because a woman no longer in Texas has the right to choose. Look what's going to happen in terms of safety in our cities because we don't have gun safety. I mean, this is not just an academic exercise. We're doing more here than just fidelity to the Constitution. This is about our safety and our well-being. And we must have a Democrat to be our next lieutenant governor. Now, I decided when I came close in 2018, I would put everything I've got into making sure the next lieutenant governor is a Democrat. And whether I'm the nominee or not, my passion for that does not change. And I hope that you'll join me. We must do everything in our power to make sure that Texans know that they can fire Dan Patrick and they can hire one of us. And that'll be a great day in the state.
That's
thank
in
you so much.
time.
Right on the dot.
And we can all, Mike, give Dan the boot. If
Yes.
you agree, everybody raise your hand.
Yay!
Amen.
I
Amen and amen.
want to thank both of the candidates for joining us. This has been very informative, and I think a lot of people have gotten some good information out of it. I put the information in the chat box about the Tuesday Zoom call about Texas 21 with 5 of the 6 candidates there. So we hope you can join us there. And thanks to Peg for timekeeping and to Terry for running the Zoom admin in the background. It takes a lot to put one of these things together. So I appreciate everyone's input and assistance. So thank you, and everyone have a good evening.
Thank you. Be safe out there.
Bye. Thank you all for doing the work. Mike,
Thank
I'll
you.
see you next
See
time.
you soon, I'm sure. I'll see you soon, I'm sure. And I look forward to
Bye-bye,
it.
you all. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Be
Bye-bye.
good Democrats.